think you said that.
Yep. 10:34. You got it.
A reading from the Acts of the Apostles. Peter proceeded to speak and said, "You know it has happened all over Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John preached, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and power. He went about doing good, and healing all those who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. We are witnesses of all he did, both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. This man God raised on the third day and granted that he be visible, not to all people, but to us, the witnesses chosen by God in advance, who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commissioned us to preach to the people and testify that he is the one appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. To him all the prophets bear witness that everyone who believes in him will receive forgiveness of sins through his name." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Okay, so this is Resurrection Sunday. So I guess we should start with the resurrection. So Paul says that if there was no resurrection, what you're doing is a complete waste of time. Go home. You're still in your sins, and you're the most pitiable of people. And so the resurrection is absolutely essential to our faith. I mean, that's really, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, then he was just, some fanatic who is mentally ill. He's either insane or it was real. And so when you look at that option, he wasn't just a nice man. He wasn't a skinny Buddha. He was insane. He just was delusional, and, he was proclaiming something that wasn't true. And so, this isn't me saying it. This is what, St. Paul says also. And so when we look at this first reading, this is right, this is basically on Pentecost. And Peter talks about how he had died on a tree. And then the man God raised on the third day and granted that it to be visible not to all the people, but to us. And he also talks about later about 500 witnesses that were there. He says, and because some of you were there. Now, he couldn't say that unless people were there, because there was lots of people. There was 500 people. That's quite a few people that all witnessed Jesus after he had risen from the dead. And so we have to understand that this isn't an optional teaching. It's the resurrection is the point of Jesus coming. It's to conquer death and sin. And so we have to, this is a tenet of our faith we really should have, a solid belief in. You guys kind of get that?
So the crowd that he appealed to, was it you walked down the street and saw a couple people here, a couple people there? Never really defines that. Or did he go in an arena and people saw him, or a field and people saw him?
Yeah, Jesus was seen by 500 people at one time, at least 500 men. So there was a big crowd that he appeared to at that point. And then there was the apostles at numerous times and the disciples.
Well, what event caused them 500 people to be together? Was it one event, or was it just...
Yeah, it was one event where he showed up to. Yeah, they were praying. Yeah. So it was so Jesus appeared to many people between the time of, his resurrection and the time of the ascension. So, and then Paul, he appeared to Paul after, when he was on his horse, the glory. He appeared, he said, why are you persecuting me? And, when he was persecuting the people.
Paul's writing this, and he's talking as a witness to the 500 people that saw it.
Yeah, it was actually Peter that said that. Peter actually said, and there was in the Acts, it was in the first part of it, where 500 people had, he goes, and some of you are here now. Some have passed away, but some of you are present now. Now, if you're making an argument, you can't tell. If I say, Frank, you saw, you saw something up here, you saw Charlie get a piece of pizza. I couldn't say that if that didn't happen. But you see, since you saw Charlie get a piece of pizza, you can say, yes, I did see him get a piece of pizza. So there's that testimony that he can make, which is, you can't make unless people were in the presence, at that time. And so I guess the whole point of it is that the resurrection is just essential. And so that if you don't have a good firm belief in the resurrection, you don't have a firm belief in our faith, because that pretty much is what our faith hinges on. If Christ didn't rise, then go home. Don't stay here. If you don't believe that, we're wasting our time.
Do you find that that's a particular teaching that people struggle with? Because I know, like the belief in the true presence is down, and a lot of other things. You find that people don't really have a firm grasp on the resurrection.
People that aren't in the Catholic faith, yeah, I think. Outside of the faith, I think it's just, they don't believe in that.
People outside of faith don't believe in the resurrection?
Yeah.
They must.
Outside of the Catholic faith?
How can you be
Oh,
a
there's
Christian
a
if
lot
you
of people, evangelicals, Lutherans, Baptists, they still believe in the resurrection.
Oh, yeah, there are a lot of people, but I'm saying people that aren't in the Christian faith don't. Muslims, and
Oh, yeah, they don't.
they don't, or Hindu, Buddhists.
Great prophet.
There's at least half of the world population that isn't Christian. So, there's a pretty big group of people out there that don't believe. And then even the ones that are Christian, what they believe is, marginal. It's kind of a, for example, Easter, gets kind of diluted by, Easter eggs and candy and this and that. The real point of Easter is resurrection. It's the most important day that ever happened in all of humanity. And so we have to get that straight. It is the day. It is the most important day that ever happened.
And yet there are still sects that say that we're wrong for celebrating Sundays. That's why Sunday is our holy day, because that's the day he rose on.
Right.
But there's still a large group of people that believe that we should be celebrating Saturdays.
Well, isn't that the Jewish? They always.
Yeah, well, they take, there's a lot of Christian denominations that still say the Sabbath is Saturday night till,
Which
or
means they're missing the whole point of the resurrection.
Friday night till Saturday night.
But it's all man-made law.
Yep. What's that on the Sabbath?
Yeah, whether the Sabbath is Saturday or Sunday, as long as you're worshiping them, that's all that matters.
Well, so the Jews believe in particular that it was that particular day, and they followed that tradition since the very beginning. And so as Catholics, as Christians, we believe, that is the Lord's Day. And so we're going to see that actually when we get into the gospel reading. It talks about on the first day of the week. So they refer to it, and that's also the day when Jesus appeared to the apostles in the upper room, and then he came back the next week and appeared, and he saw doubting Thomas, and he said, "Put your fingers." So and since the very beginning of Christianity, it's been the new day that they've always celebrated. It's the 8th day. It's the new beginning. And so since the very beginning of Christianity, they began celebrating it on that day. So
So if you believe the Sabbath is Saturday, did Good Friday happen on Thursday?
no, what they have is, so they would have Passover, and he had to be taken down and buried before Sabbath, which was Friday night.
Sunset.
Yeah, sunset Friday night. And so that's the whole basis of, that's why they didn't want to have to do any of this stuff with the Jews, because then they would be violating the Sabbath. So they broke because when he's on the cross, they broke the legs of most of them, because the only way they could breathe is to push up on their legs, so they could get a breath of air. So they would break the legs, so they would basically die of suffocate, right? And it would be very quick. With Jesus, of course, he was already gone, so they just pierced his side. Okay, so let's get into the responsorial psalm. Who wants to read that? How about you, Deb, or no?
I'd be happy
Yeah, that's what I was gonna suggest, but
I have it. Let us rejoice and be glad. This is the day the Lord. Come on. If I sing it, you have to. And last week when I didn't sing my soul longs, or the one about last week when I didn't sing it, they sang it in church.
Oh, okay.
The, oh, my God, my God.
Oh, my
Why hast thou forsaken me? Right.
Saved by the
Hello.
bell.
Okay.
You can read
This
it
is
if you
the day
want.
the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad.
Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Let the house of Israel say, his mercy endures forever.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad.
The right hand of the Lord has struck with power. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. I shall not die but live and declare the works of the Lord.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad.
The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord has this been done. It is wonderful in our eyes.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. Very good. No, I have this psalm on a plaque in my house, so I see it every morning when I wake up, which is, it's good to have reminders. So for example, the men's group, at 6 o'clock on the dot, noon, and then 6, and sometimes at midnight, they'll text, the angel of the Lord, just to prompt people into prayer. And I think it's great, because really we need to get in the habit of having things that bring our mind to God and to prayer, versus there's a lot of other garbage we can bring our mind to. We don't want to do that. We want to bring our mind to prayer. And because we're humans, and basically we need help.
Yeah.
It's good to have these prompts in our life to help us to get in patterns or habits, make good habits and become their slaves. I mean, really, that's what we need to do. We don't want to serve, bad habits. We don't want to be a slave to sin or anything else. But we want to have virtue, and that's, you want to live a life of virtue, which is the opposite of vice. So we can practice virtues or we can practice vice. And that's not like the vice that are in the police department. So, but this is just such a wonderful psalm. And why is this here? Does anybody have any ideas? Why are they having this on Easter Sunday?
Yeah, that's right. The
We're
resurrection.
rejoicing.
Rejoicing and being glad, right, exactly. And so we should be rejoicing. And even this week, we know the end. We know that, ultimately the Lord, we reflect on, there's the passion and death, but the end is the resurrection. We never, get that out of your mind, because in the end, he wins. He conquers sin and death. And yeah, we may have to get crucified here on this earth, but in the end, he said, if you want to be my disciple, pick up your cross and follow me. And I'm not going to say I'm not going to give you, the prosperity gospel, which, all you have to do is believe and receive. And Dennis, do you want to pass out that basket? If you give tithings, you'll be blessed tenfold, maybe 100-fold if you give enough. No, we're not about that. And so we have to be careful, because that's a way of perverting, the gospel. We want to hear the whole gospel, which, God definitely, blesses you. And what is the blessing for keeping the commandments?
Heaven.
The keeping of the commandments. Really, in heaven, ultimately, you're going to live a life of virtue. So on earth, what happens? So what happens to people that steal, unless you're a politician, but they get caught? What happens? You could end up in jail, right? And there's punishment. Unless it's promoted. I don't even want to go there. It used to be that there was consequences for, breaking the commandments, for, why don't we commit adultery? Why don't we steal? Why don't we kill? These things have penalties that are attached to them. And typically, those that do these things, may have a very low quality of life because you may be in prison, it may cause problems in your families, it may cause problems with your friends. I mean, it may cause problems at work. So God gave us these commandments not to say, well, I'm a party pooper. You guys are having too much fun down there. Let's see if I can put a few rules on them and crimp their style. No, he did that because he loves us, and he knows that we'll, if we follow these commandments, in the end, we'll do better. And that's ultimately what it's about. I mean, is doing well in the end, at the end of our life. And so I think when I was growing up, it seemed more like a rule book, oh, don't do this, don't do that. I was like, yeah, geez, it's all rules. As opposed to, I try to say, when my kids, I see a hot stove, I say, don't touch it. I don't want you to get burned. And, if you do touch it, you could have a nice, nice blister, from grabbing a hot ember, and it burns right through it. Now I'm supposed to.
We can lance that thing right here.
Oh yeah, we could bleed, and I could look like I have one of the wounds. But anyways, I mean, we really, it's because of our, God's love for us that He gives us these rules for our own sake. And so I think we got to keep that in mind. It's He gives them to us out of love for us, and it's similar with Saint Therese of the Little Flower. I mean, she said, I didn't have all these great sins, but my dad and my parents would keep me from these great sins. And so before falling in a pit, he would lay down something so I could go across it. And now her two parents, Louis and Zelly, are saints. So we have, the three as saints. I mean, that's, modern saints. That's a whole family. The one sister is also on her way to canonization too.
4 other sisters were in the convent, in the cloister convent.
All that lived went into.
And so a lot of people, I mean, when you look at her life, you think, well, she lived to 24. She didn't do anything. She was locked up in a cage the last 9 years. I mean, you could look at that. If you're from the world, you could say that. In the world, I mean, it would be that's the stupidest waste of life ever. I mean, from the world's perspective, what did she do? She didn't go anywhere. She didn't do anything. She sat around, cleaned up crap, and
She's a patron of missionaries, and she never left the walls.
exactly. And so the ways of God are so far above our ways. We look at things in worldly ways. Well, what did she have? She didn't have much of a resume there. What'd she do? And I guess the point I'm making is that we don't, we want to look at things not from the eyes of the world, which is perverted and corrupt, but we want to look at it from the eyes of God.
I'm reading, is it Imitation of the Soul?
Isn't it Diary of a Soul?
Whatever her book is, I'm reading it. And she's just now in Rome asking the Pope, but just the love of what she wanted from so young, you can feel it reading it. It makes you inspired just reading it. Is making me inspired
Right.
just reading it.
Something of the Soul, that's supposed to be the 3rd or 4th most read book in the world.
Yeah, I think it's like the 3rd or 4th, yep.
I think
And-
I picked it off the table right here before. But
She said she was closer with her mom when she received her communion than when she was alive.
there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Right, because, she was in the communion of saints. And so she's with God, and she's receiving, God, body, blood, soul, and divinity. So her theology, I mean, for a young girl that really didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything, really, I mean, she was in the convent at, 15? I mean, it was pretty profound. And that's why she's a doctor of the church also, which is, I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, and how she was raised. I mean, her dad just taught, mom died young, but her dad taught her. And it was good.
Yep. All right, second reading.
I didn't read it.
You want to read it? You got to read on Sunday, you said, so you better
Reading.
practice.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Colossians. Brothers and sisters, if then you were raised with Christ, seek what is above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Think of what is above, not of what is on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ your life appears, then you too will appear with him in glory. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So, yeah, we seek the things of God, not of the flesh. And so, what does this mean about for you have died? We die to sin, right? And we die, and also and we were baptized into Christ's death. And we're going to be united with Jesus in his rising. Go ahead, Kyle.
No, I was just gonna ask, do you think he's also talking about the death of your own will here, or is that kind of getting beyond what you might have been talking about here?
In a sense, I mean, you're dying to sin, so I mean, you still have your free will,
Yeah.
but there's you're dying to your participation in that.
Yeah, because isn't
Right.
that what's kind of ultimately meant when like you're suffering? They say offered up, like you're offering up your will to accept whatever's coming. Because
You're surrendering.
yeah,
Yep,
because
that's
like we still have the free will, but like we're kind of in a sense giving it up to have it subsumed into God's will.
yeah, we're surrendering our will. And the difficult, the difficult part typically is knowing, you discern. I mean, you pray about, God, is this your will? And that's a whole nother discussion about discerning God's will. It's pretty much, if it's a sin, it's not God's will. So, I mean, it's in that regard, it's pretty simple in terms of that. Is it sinful? If it is, then that's your will. That's the flesh. And he's saying, don't seek those things. What are we desiring? Are we desiring the things of God? Or are we desiring the things of this world? And so I think, there's this important point that, there's suffering and pain here, but we will rise, and we want to rise with Christ in the last day. I mean, because all of us will come to judgment at the end of our life, each and every one of us. And so when we stand before God, I mean, we're going to have to have an account for all that we've done and all that we've said. And so that's good for guys, because we have about 1/4 of the words of women. So they're going to have to answer that. Now, guys have their own issues. So. but I mean, that, it says in scriptures that there is going to be an accounting for what we do. And we have this amazing opportunity now. I mean, you're here, right? It's Lent. And we can end it strong. I mean, we can end Lent strong. I mean, we can partake in, meditating upon the passion of Christ and trying to become more conformed. So when people see us, they see Christ. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is that I kind of, basically, I mean, you're kind of surrendering. Well, when people see you, it's like the St. Patrick breastplate prayer. I mean, Christ be in the eyes of all who see me, so that when they see us, they see Christ. And really, how is that? I mean, if, that's the scandal of Christianity. Oh, I'm a Christian. I'm a devout Catholic, as I'm voting for partial birth abortion. I mean, that is the scandal. So that is the scandal of Christianity, is when people say, oh, I'm a Christian, and yet they're doing things that are diametrically opposed to what Christ, and the church has stood for since the very beginning. And so that's the scandal of Christianity. Or I'm a Christian, and yet they're gassing the Jews. And when St. John Paul II went and saw, that he said this was done by baptized people. And it just, he just wept, because, these are people, Christ had died, and he went through all this for each and every one of these people, because they're valid, they have a valid baptism. So, had they not, they had entrance into heaven. I mean, they had a valid baptism, and yet they did, they were basically gassing people, killing, just the atrocities that he saw. And that was kind of a point that really struck in my mind, and we do that too. I mean, we've been baptized, and that's why, again, they give us the little white stole they put over us, when you're baptized, and they say, wear this, bring this to you when you die, white, unstained. And so, had a black shirt on. It's a little white on it. So I'm just
Here, kind of, I
hear a lot of Catholics who are Democrats say, well, there's this thing called separation of church and state. You can't use that. That's
Separation of church and state.
That's not an excuse. That's not valid. What do you think Jesus would say if you used that in his presence with your voting?
Oh yeah, we're gonna all have to answer. I mean, for how we even have to answer for who we give tithes to. It says in Scripture to let your tithes stay in your palms until they sweat, and which means you're to discern who you're giving tithes to. Because I mean, there's places that they say, you know, they're called Catholic in their organization, but they're pro-abortion and they're pro all kinds of craziness. And you know, I mean, God's law is pretty clear, and you got, I mean, you even have people within the church that are for abortion, they're for this transgender agenda, this gay agenda. I mean, they're for all that, and yet they, you know, they're leaders of the church. And actually, I mean, we had McCarrick, who was the top cardinal in the United UCCB for, I don't know, 30, 40 years, and he was probably, you know, basically he would promote pedophiles and send them all over the United States. And actually, even in some of the, I think it was in Notre Dame, but there was some people that showed all the connections of all the different things that he did over the years. And it's just terrifying that, you know, we had him in there. And then even just this last year, the top Monsignor part of, they call him Monsignor Grinder. I mean, that's kind of or Tinder or whatever he was, you know, but he had, I think he said 1,000 gay partners in a year or two. I'm like, how is that even possible? But I mean, that's what, and their justification was, well, it wasn't children. It's like, oh, so that makes it right. I mean, I guess, well,
When it is children, it causes psychological damage because you cannot survive, a boy or a girl,
right,
cannot survive rape without psychological damage,
right.
serious psychological
Oh, yeah.
damage.
I know, but I'm just saying, I don't think that's a very good, I mean, evil is evil no matter
That is,
what.
but
And
some evil,
yeah, that
I
is,
believe
yeah.
some evil is more evil than other evils. If you're doing, don't get me wrong, I'm not approving anything, but
Oh, I
if
agree.
they're doing it
Yeah.
with a consenting partner, I think that's evil, and I won't tell you what I think should be done. It's less than charitable. But just recently, a priest somewhere, I don't know where, but he was once pastor at Sacred Heart in Dearborn. And he was just convicted, I don't know what the sentence is, but he was convicted of a rape 20 years ago. 20 years ago he did a rape, he's convicted now. I don't know what the story is. But if it was a kid 20 years ago, that kid has lived a life of misery
Oh,
or
yeah.
sin because of that action.
Oh, but you're, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go into confession. I'm gonna withhold my opinion on what should probably happen to him. And actually, in prison, that's what happens to a lot of them, anyways. They get, they're not treated very well. So,
We shouldn't rely on convicts to do what we should be doing, and that's execution. Rape of a child is an executable.
well, I mean, that's the Jewish law we'll get into, is that it's, I think that,
Yeah, but Jewish law permits abortion too, so.
well, that's their interpretation. But what I'm saying is, in Jewish law, sodomy was punishable by death. So,
I mean, it does bring up, not to derail this even more, but it does bring up interesting questions. 'Cause if I'm not mistaken, not that it was, I don't think it was ever acted upon, but if I'm not mistaken, in the Middle Ages, witchcraft was a capital offense by the church because of the amount of evil it brought in the world. So
I agree. They should do that too.
it is interesting that there's some historical precedent for this idea of there's just certain amounts of evil that's just too much to be okay with or allow.
Right. I think we should bring that back, execution for witchcraft.
For witchcraft?
Witchcraft. I call it witchcraft.
Witchcraft.
No, I mean, and so, I mean, the point is that there is evil that's brought into the world by, you know, and so Wiccan, I mean, was in the top 5 beliefs. And I mean, so people were, like the Harry Potters and stuff. I mean, it glorifies witchcraft, and the whole New Age is, has an element of that stuff in it, where they're relying on crystals and this and that. I mean, just stuff that,
Well, it's jammed down your throat with every show and every commercial anymore, so.
I'm glad
the
I don't
whole
have a
world-
TV. Yeah.
The whole world is being made to absorb all of, everything's upside down.
Exactly. And well, that's it. So that's in Isaiah 6. It says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good.
Yeah.
And there, I mean, there's like the strongest pronouncement. So, I mean, Father Zachary gave us a nice little list of how to be prepared for the second coming of Christ in our Lenten preparation. And so we just have to always be ready because, like I said last time, there might be a flash and that might be it. And if it is, well, praise God. I mean, just be ready. Be ready always. Be prepared. Have your lamp,
You and I'll be here, don't worry.
What's that?
You and I'll be here.
We got to stay ready.
Even
We'll be
flash.
left over.
No, I don't mean rapture. I'm talking about like a nuclear blast. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be left behind, trust me.
Yeah, I mean,
Isn't it
There's
pretty
some things
well
that need to be
accepted
done.
that there's certain things that have to happen before the end? Like, isn't it accepted that the Jews convert
and the temple is rebuilt. There's a lot of different steps. I mean, that's in there, but all the Jews thought they knew the whole rigmarole of how things were going to happen in terms of the last time Christ came, and that's why they missed him. They they missed it completely. And so I don't know what God, his ways are way higher than my ways, so I have no idea. He could come back today and I wouldn't be surprised. Because in his mind, certain things may have been, like the church or the temple. In his mind, it may have been established. I don't know. I can't say. I'm not. Only we won't know until we're up in heaven. Really,
We may not care then.
no. We're just got to get there.
I have to do some research on the Jews after they crucified Christ, because I can't imagine what they did to enrage the Romans to the extent that the Romans expended that much time and effort and took that much vengeance on them. Is that because they crucified Christ? Or is
No,
that-
no.
is that-
Yeah.
Or is that some of the purely worldly thing? I know that the Jews revolted a few times. They actually revolted and killed something like 100,000 people on Crete. So they were capable of violence, but to have the Romans become that vicious against them they conquered you, they took your money, and then they left you alone, pretty much. But for them to proceed to that point, maybe it was something because they crucified Christ, or maybe they were just that nasty. I don't know.
Well, so God allows, so what their last words were, they said, let his blood be upon us and our children.
Yeah.
And as soon as you understand that, they cursed themselves. So at 70 AD, when that went down, they were brave then. That's why they were intimidating Pilate. That's why Pilate, when he was there, that's why he knew Jesus was a righteous man. And yet he had him crucified to placate them. And I don't know if I told you this. Did I tell you last time so when Pilate got his power, what happened is he went into the temple area and he had images, and all the Jews, they had this huge protest. And what they were going to do is he rounded them all up and he brought them into this huge auditorium or coliseum. And he said, if you guys don't knock off these protests, I'm going to cut off all your heads. And all the Jews, showed their neck. And this is what they documented in history. And so Pilate backed down. And so then they had, they had the one up on him. And then there was a couple other situations that happened after that where Pilate, he was put there to placate, is to collect the taxes, just like you said, and keep the peace. And the Jews got worse and worse after that point, where they got too big for the britches and Rome came down hard on them. And then they fought back, instead of giving in, and they all went into the temple. and they barricaded themselves, and so Rome surrounded them, starved them out, and then burned them to death. And it was terrible. 1.2 to 1.4 million Jews died.
And that was done with swords and knives.
And burning to death. And they were, they hadn't eaten, and they cut off all supplies. Because think about it, it's up on a hill. And they just surrounded them and waited until they,
Men and women?
oh yeah, men, women, it was terrible. I mean, but they all, when you think about it, with God's divine judgment, he utilized, so God typically will utilize, so for example, Babylon, to punish his people. He'll use the secular powers, some godless country like China or Russia. Well, Russia not so much anymore, but China for sure, to punish, people of faith, because sometimes that's what it takes to get us back. He loves us that much that, there is punishment, because he wants our souls to live. And, we get too attached to things. So we get attached to material things. We get attached to our phones. We get attached to all the things that are unimportant to God. These are things that are keeping us from God. Ultimately, we love them more than we love God, right? So that becomes an idol. So he's just like in the plagues, he knocked down all the idols. What are our idols today? Think about it. Telephones, political, the whole political structures. There's
I think the political structure is forced on most of us. I wouldn't care less if I didn't have 9 grandchildren. I wouldn't care what happened to this country. I worry about them.
Right.
Otherwise.
Okay, let's get into the gospel. With that, let's get into the gospel. Joe's not here, so we need someone to read the gospel. What's that?
Can we talk about some more genocides before? we
Oh,
move on?
sure. No, he wanted. Were you
no, that's a
joking?
joke.
Okay.
Oh, so you get to read the gospel.
I thought he had some more genocides to talk about. So.
But I guess to kind of tie some stuff together, no, that's just way getting too off topic.
Oh yeah, we won't get into the 20th century stuff.
Oh yeah, because it was just going to be about Fatima and why. I don't think the end is here yet, but.
Say more.
Oh no, it's just because you mentioning about true, we don't know God's intentions, but sometimes He spells some stuff out for us, and even at Fatima, it says that there's going to be a rebirth in the church, and it's going to explode. Now that could mean something other than the church honor. So, I guess to your point, that doesn't necessarily mean that has to happen before there's a nuclear flash and we're all taken off this planet. But I don't know, kind of. I view it in a good way. So maybe a little bit of kind of some good news too in what we've been talking about, that it does seem like there's something good around the corner at some point. Who knows how long the corner is?
Right. And there is, and that's the whole point of the resurrection. There is going to be good. That is the one thing I can guarantee, is that after this life, there will be good.
Well, I guess it sounds like there's going to be some good on this life too. Maybe we might not be alive to see it, but
I'm hoping. It just seems, when everything seems completely against us, that's usually when God steps in, when there is no hope. When everything is sunk, everything is completely, you're at that low point, and often that's when God will show up, because then we all know that this is not a man, but it is from God. And I think that, you see him come, it happens, and even in people's lives, sometimes they have to get so broken down, for example, alcoholics or people that are just so at the very bottom, and that's sometimes what it takes for them to to basically, they either die or they're going to, make a change. Go ahead, Dennis.
Okay. Aren't you reading Sunday?
Yeah.
She already read once. She already read
Oh,
once.
she doesn't read the gospel, though.
Does she read the gospel?
No, she
No.
doesn't.
Oh,
Father
that's
does, yeah. So.
Oh, that's right.
Read from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you.
Great deal of it.
On the first day of the week, Mary of Magdala came to the tomb early in the morning, while it was still dark, and saw the stone removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and to the other disciples, whom Jesus loved, and told them, "They have taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." So Peter and the other disciple went out and came to the tomb. They both ran, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter and arrived at the tomb first. He bent down and saw the burial cloths there, but did not go in. When Simon Peter arrived after him, he went into the tomb and saw the burial cloths there, and the cloth that had covered his head, not with the burial cloths, but rolled up in a separate place. Then the other disciple also went in, the one who had arrived at the tomb first, and he saw and believed. For they did not yet understand the scripture that he had to rise from the dead. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so let's kind of break this down. So we mentioned earlier on the first day of the week, so that would have been a Sunday. Mary Magdala, we know she was the Mary that was delivered from the demons. You know, Jesus cast out the demons.
That's Mary Magdalene.
Yeah,
That we
right.
know.
So it would have been still dark. Go ahead, Kyle.
No, I was just gonna say, there seems to be a lot of consensus too that it's also Mary from the, Mary, who's the other one?
Martha Mary?
Yeah, and Lazarus, like, there seems to be, like, I've heard that there seems to be a fair amount of consensus that all three of those Marys are the same Mary. I mean, could be wrong, but.
Right, I mean, that's the Mary that anointed the feet of Jesus with the oil. And so, yeah, that's kind of, I've heard the same thing where, I mean, it's not completely definite, but I think you're right. But it was dark in the morning, so it would have been, so for a woman traveling, I mean, that took, you know, women typically wouldn't travel during the dark. So that would have been something that's you know, I mean, that would have been dangerous, but she went out there anyways.
Weren't they gonna sit last week and sit and watch it, or when he was put in the tomb, weren't they gonna sit there?
No, they had the soldiers. So I mean, part of the, so there's a different narrative for each of the gospels, and in this, you know, and so the other gospels, you know, they talk about the empty tomb and the angels being there, and so John was written much, much, much later than the first three gospels, and so we find in John's gospel a lot of details, and you'll see that the things that he emphasizes are all there for one particular point, to show the divinity of Christ. And it's very important. They're pretty much testimonies that this is what happened. And we see down here a little bit further when we have, so for example, the head cloth is rolled up. Now, during that time, if you're a grave robber, you would steal the linens and leave the body. I mean, that's because those linens were very valuable. The body had no value. And so the fact that it was rolled up neatly, if you're going to rob a grave, that's not something you would do. I mean, that's one point. And so, for example, in the Passion of the Christ, you know, they showed Jesus rising and the linens just kind of falling down. And then, you know, I'm not sure why but it was. But I think John mentions that point because if you're going to rob a tomb, I mean, they would, you know, they're not going to roll things up because they're going to do their crime and get the heck out of there quickly, typically.
And John was an actual witness. He was the only one of the writers that was there.
Yep, he was.
The other Matthew, they weren't there.
Well, John Mark was a disciple. He would have been, so John Mark would have been there in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, but he wouldn't be there at the tomb.
No,
He didn't show
no.
up till later.
Yep. I mean, he was with Jesus all throughout his ministry, but
Yeah.
so he would have been.
Is he and the other disciple, that's John?
Yeah, that's John. So that's this is kind of funny because you see this is from the Gospel of John. And so basically he's saying, Peter and I ran and I whipped him in the race. You know, I got there first and then I had to wait around. I had enough time to look in the tomb. But you notice that he defers to Peter because
Peter's the head.
Peter's he's the head of their group. I mean, and they all knew that. And
Jewish custom back at that time was men do not run. They only walk. They don't run.
yeah, he ran fast too.
He had sandals on. They didn't have
Hard to
running
run
shoes.
with sandals.
Yeah, I mean, so they would gird their loins, you know, like tie up so they could run, because otherwise they have these long robes. You can't, if you ever tried, you know, like if you have, like the cassocks, if you try to run with those things on, because they go down, I mean, you'd fall down. You might not. It's,
And plus he was young, so that helps, like,
yeah, he was the youngest, by far, he was the very youngest of the, John was probably, you know, maybe even, you know,
Wasn't he like 24 years old when Jesus was crucified?
I think even, I mean, I don't,
18.
About 18, yeah.
it's hard to say. I have to interview him later. I'll ask him. I will, yes. But I think that there's a bit of humor here too, that it kind of shows. I mean, when I first heard this, I kind of was laughing because it's kind of, I mean, if you're close friends, you know, you'd be like, oh, we ran and I kind of whipped him, you know, I was there first. But then he deferred to him, which shows his respect. I mean, it shows that he deferred to his authority of it.
it's kind of funny though, because like the way you're presenting, because I've also heard by him not putting his name in there was kind of trying to be humble.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, he is.
saying,
And same thing with Mark. I mean, in Mark's gospel, it was only in the, you know, in the Garden of Gethsemane where he ran off, the one guy ran off naked. Well, that was Mark. And so that's always been a test. That was kind of his, you know, identifier that, you know,
Is that
it was.
Mark or John?
That version, John.
No, that was John Mark. It was Mark. Yeah, so Mark wrote that gospel, and he was the writer for Peter. So he was Peter's secretary, basically. And yeah, that he ran off naked. It wasn't John the Apostle. So yeah, but that's how they use these different ways of identifying themselves. But he's not, you know, he's saying the other apostle. Again, he doesn't mention his own name. But he is an eyewitness, and he is, you know, everybody knew it was John's writing. So we have Simon arrived after him. He went into the tomb and saw the burial cloth there, and the cloth that had covered his head, not with the burial cloth, but rolled up in a separate place. The other disciple also went in, the one who had arrived at the tomb first, and he saw and believed. So John, I mean, it was he saw that and he believed. He believed he had risen from the dead. And so I think this is very important.
Some of the other gospel narratives are three women went, and when they got there, there was the angel there that told them who they were looking
Right.
for. So
Yeah, exactly.
some of these are different.
Yeah, they are different. And actually when, if you ever had, you know, I mean, so if you ever listened to like the Case for Christ, I mean, they kind of spell out, this guy was a detective for 40 years. And when he went through it, he showed that, I mean, you know, I mean, have you guys done interviews, I mean, of people? And so when you interview, if you got two people that have the identical story, what do you think? They're lying, exactly. Because people everybody, I mean, we all see an event, we're going to remember it slightly different, right? I mean, it's going to be,
Different details.
right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, if something's corroborated, then that's pretty evident too. And so these they're complementary, but they're not, you know, they're not identical. They're different people. They've written at different times too.
Are you talking about that movie, A Case for Christ, about Lee Strobel?
Yeah,
Chicago Times? He
yeah.
was a writer.
Yeah, he was a writer, but he was, oh yeah, that's right. He was a writer. He was an investigative journalist. Yeah. When they actually did journalism. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Chicago.
Yeah, there was another one I was thinking of that was detective that did it also, but Lee Strobel is the one I was. Yep. He was, and it's very good. I mean, he's a Protestant, so we'll take it
He's
all.
done many movies on for Christ.
Right.
It's a pretty incredible story to go from hating God to
Yeah, he was a complete
absolutely
atheist.
loving God. Yeah.
Right. He was a complete atheist, and he wanted to show that it was not true. And in trying to prove it, he realized that it was, you know, the evidence for the resurrection. And so, Charlie, what was the probability of so there's been a lot of math studies and stuff, even on the probabilities of the resurrection. It is the only explanation that is the most probable case when you look at everything that happened. I mean, I've seen, you know, I mean, if you look at it just from a strictly from all the testimony, from everything else, I mean, even the fact that people, so, okay, let's say Charlie died and, we're his friends and, and he, would we be willing to die to say he rose from the dead, for something like that? I mean, we're going to be martyred on our own, and if somebody didn't rise from the dead, they're going to just slay us left and right. I mean,
They were tortured to death.
yeah, tortured to death. Oh, you're
All they
lying.
do is change their
Deny
story.
Christ.
And there were 387 Old Testament prophecies from over 2,000 years, and he fulfilled all of those, and that probability is 4 trillion to 1.
So that's pretty good odds. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what are the odds? Well, unless you're printing up money, then it's 4 trillion doesn't mean that much anymore. But 4 trillion to 1, if you think about, I mean, the probability of getting hit by lightning is like 12 million to 1 or something. I mean, it's just not. I mean, it's not even in the same realm. You have to add many, many, many more. Maybe it's 120 million to 1. I don't know. It's nothing even close to 1 trillion, though. I mean, it's the statistics. I mean, basically, the probabilities are so low that the only logical explanation, and that's we don't really need that. But people who don't have any faith, I mean, at all. I mean, if you're a complete atheist and you're trying to say, well, what's really happened here? That's the conclusion they've come up with. And actually, I'm trying to think of the soldier. There was a movie out about a soldier that was trying to find the body of Christ. It was another.
Well, that's the risen.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was
He
an.
was the tribune. He was the captain in charge of the Roman guard, and he was the one that ordered him to put the lance in the side of Christ.
And he
He was dead.
right, and they were trying to find the body, basically. I mean,
What's it
so.
called, The Risen?
Isn't that on Pure Flix or something like that?
You can probably get it on YouTube.
It could be.
You
Yeah.
can get the disc off of Amazon.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but
It's
I mean,
it's not biblical, but it's an extrapolation of what could have happened.
Well, it
so there was some
brings
stuff
up
that
your awareness.
right,
Right.
and I think that's where so I think it's important. I mean, we're looking at the resurrection, and I think I'm just trying to emphasize again and again the importance of the resurrection to our faith, but also, God made it. God has it set up in such a way that with our mind we can believe. We want to have faith and reason. Not just blind faith, because our reason we can say, well, with our reason, it can also lead us to Him, because He wants us to love Him with what? Our mind, body, and soul, with our whole being. And so if our mind is like, oh, that's completely not rational or not probable, then we wouldn't want to believe. But God wants to draw us in body, mind, and soul. So I think with that, we'll go on to the catechism. Donna, we are praying for her and her family. Her dad passed away, and I think everybody signed the card.
I think we were reading, the actual truths about the matrimony. I have it marked in 326 at the top.
That's what I have too. I put exit in.
You want me to be Donna?
No, you can be Dad, but you can read Donna's part.
Okay.
If you want to identify as Donna, you can. Not to use.
Page 326 at the top, the continuation in the important truth about matrimony. Since Christian marriage is a sacrament, the Church possesses jurisdiction over the marriages of all baptized persons. The Church uses this authority especially by laying down marriage impediments, that is, by ruling that certain couples may not marry because of a prohibition arising either from the law of God or from the law of the Church. If a couple bound by an impediment attempted marriage without a dispensation from the Church, the marriage would be sinful though valid, supposing that the impediment was an impeding impediment, and both sinful and invalid, The church can give a dispensation from an impediment established by ecclesiastical law, but not from an impediment established by divine law.
How much wood could a woodchuck
Okay,
chuck?
what does
woodchuck
that
chuck
mean?
wood?
Say it in simple terms.
So I mean, they're just going through, is it a valid marriage, or was there certain things that so I mean, for example, let's say if it was a close relative, then it wouldn't be, there's some impediments to the marriage. Or if you have somebody who's Catholic and somebody who's an atheist, or for example, you have a shotgun marriage. I mean, that would be another example where basically you're going to get married or I'm going to pull the trigger type of thing. So, I mean, there's impediments. I think that's one part of it. And so those make the,
Or like if they're divorced and not annulled, or
yeah, that's another, yep. So that is, there's impediments, and that has to do with the validity of it also. So it can be both sinful and invalid, or invalid and not sinful.
what is it, impeding impediment?
So we're going to get into that, so keep reading.
Okay. The fact that a person has taken a private vow of chastity is an impeding impediment. Thank you. The bond of an already existing marriage is a,
So if somebody's married, they can't get married again.
okay. The bond of an already existing marriage is a deriment impediment by divine law. The blood relationship between first or second cousins is a deriment impediment by ecclesiastical law.
Unless you're from down south.
Am I saying deriment right? I never heard that word before. We're just ignoring it, but.
That's not true. Forgive me, Lord. I don't want to go back to confession this week.
You're already going.
Is deriment?
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks for your vote of confidence.
You always stand there. Why
He's
you
already
doing
done
I don't even know if I'm saying it right.
Might as well own it.
Okay, nowadays, the state of marriage is degraded by many persons. They enter marriage hastily with little thought of its sacred dignity and with small regard for its obligations. After a few years, they tire of each other, obtain a divorce, and marry again. Sad to say, even some Catholics have not the proper concept of marriage, and though they may not go so far as to seek divorce, they try to rid themselves of the burdens of the married state and selfishly refuse to live up to the obligations of this state as God has established it. That is the reason for unhappiness in some Catholic homes. It is the teaching of the Catholic Church that the marriage of two baptized persons, once they have used their right of sexual union, can never be dissolved except by the death of one of the parties. This rule holds for the marriage of baptized non-Catholics as well as for that of Catholics. In other types of marriage, the bond can sometimes be broken with the consent or authority of the Church. There are 3 types of such marriages which can be dissolved in exceptional circumstances. 1, if at the time of the marriage both of the parties were unbaptized, and later one receives baptism and the other refuses to dwell peacefully and sinlessly with the convert. This is called the Pauline privilege. 2, if at the time of the marriage one was a baptized non-Catholic and the other an unbaptized person. 3, if at the time of the marriages both were baptized persons, but they never had sexual relations as husband and wife. Furthermore, sometimes the Church allows a husband and wife to separate or live apart without having any right to remarry. Before the marriage of a Catholic couple,
Works for me.
the law of the Church calls for the publication of the banns, announcements of the coming marriage, to be made in the parish of each of the parties on 3 Sundays or feast days. Then, if anyone believes that they should not marry because of some impediment or other grave reason, he should at once inform the authorities of the Church. Those intending to marry should make arrangements with one of the priests in the parish of the intended bride, where the ceremony should ordinarily take place at least a month before the date of the marriage. In a Catholic home where the husband and wife live according to the Christian ideals as proposed by the Catholic Church, there is true contentment and happiness, even though material comforts and luxuries may be lacking. They bring up their children religiously with the realization that God has sent them, these little ones, to be trained in His love and to become one day citizens of heaven. Such a Catholic home is truly an image of the home of Nazareth, in which dwelt the three holiest persons that ever lived on earth, the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Resolution: pray every day for your parents. If they are alive, ask God to help them to live up to their obligations of the holy state of matrimony. If they are dead, pray that they may soon be admitted to the kingdom of heaven. And I add that we pray that for ourselves too.
Right. I think that's very good. I think you see here this last paragraph is, it says, in a Catholic home
Yes.
where the husband and wife live according to the Christian ideals.
You feel good reading it. I felt good
Yeah,
reading
there
it.
is
It was
true
good.
contentment and happiness. And so if that doesn't happen, so if the husband and wife are not living according to Christian ideals, there may not be true contentment and happiness. I mean, so we don't have to look that far to see that, there could be a problem, if you got, especially if, one partner is, one person may be living a faith, another person may not have any faith. They may be a devout Catholic by name only, versus truly living the faith. There could be a million different, permutations of this also. They bring up their children religiously with the realization that God has sent them these little ones to be trained in his love and to become one day. So the focus is on raising the children, getting them to heaven, right? You can kind of see that that's here. They say that such a home is, even though that they may not have material things, that was mentioned earlier too. So the focus isn't on having a bunch of crap. It's on getting your children to heaven and your spouse to heaven. Really, that's the way it should be ordered. Any comments, Kyle?
I don't know, I just looked up that Durer and then means absolute. So those are the ones that can't be, those are hard no's. Where I guess impeding impediments must be that years ways to overcome them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's some that you just can't overcome, like first cousin or something like that, or
That's ecclesiastical, isn't it? They can waive that. It's not divine.
I think that's the one impediment here. That's
Yeah, it is ecclesiastical, but they did list it as you can't overcome it.
it's something that can't be,
Okay.
One it probably comes from also the protecting humans and genetics and all that. Like it could be overcome, but the church probably won't because of looking out for the health of its members.
What about male and female, or just male and male?
I was just thinking that exact same thing.
That's the big question of our day. It's not, it's not a sacrament. That's the one thing people, that's why they call it a civil union. That's not marriage. That's not a sacrament. That's whatever you want to call it.
They want that interpretation so that one person can claim the other person on their insurance.
Right.
And taxes and all kinds of other things. It's satanic. So that's my official response. Just for the record for YouTube. Okay, let's get into Exodus. Anybody have any questions on that section since we're...
We will be sacramentals next time.
Oh, perfect. That's what you were talking about. Some of the sacramentals. So what are some sacramentals you guys know about?
Right there's the relic. Right there, the relic.
Right? Holy water,
Holy water.
candle, bells, bells. Yeah,
Salt, blessed oil.
scapulars. Yeah. Yep, medals. Okay, so we finished 14 and now we're beginning chapter 15, page 36. The songs of Moses and Miriam. Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. we'll stop right there.
How come the Bible talks about slavery and wars like they're commonplace and expected? They're,
I know it's not very politically correct.
no, but the tumultuous existence of man.
It is.
Always,
It's always been wars. It's always been fight for, throughout all of our history. But I mean, it's interesting. It says the Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. I think Patton had that as his, if I recall correctly. That was one of his sayings that he had on. What's that?
It all started with Cain and Abel.
Yeah, actually, it all started with Adam and Eve choosing
Well,
sin.
yeah.
I mean, even
But I
before
mean,
that.
Actually, the war part of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's when the first murder happened. Yeah. And so, but they're claiming. So, is it right that they're exalting the destruction of all these people? I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot of all these. I'm sure all these soldiers had families and stuff.
It's too bad it couldn't have just been Pharaoh, but he didn't even go in there,
No, I mean, so for example, I mean, we watch war movies and we see all the Germans killed, right? And we were like, yeah, blow them up. Well,
No, I don't-
maybe
I
I
don't see
didn't.
that. I read too much history, did too much research on the wars, because that's what history is what I like.
Right. So you didn't care that the Nazis died, or anything?
Well,
They weren't all
were they Nazis? Were they Nazis?
Oh yeah,
No, they weren't all Nazis.
Not all of them.
No, they weren't. They were drafted like we were during Vietnam and everything else, and get your butt in there and do it. I knew a guy whose father was
Well,
a
even
German soldier in the war. He
And they-
was drafted, and he told and he went and did it, because what's he gonna do?
and there's actually a time where I think it was on Christmas where both sides had a ceasefire and they just randomly did that and they exchanged gifts or something, and in the middle of the field.
They refused to fight.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, so
previous
on both sides, I mean.
Ratner was
However, we do want, so if they are promoting a greater evil where, they did have a device of mass Holocaust, which did happen, then we do want to put an end to that system. So, I mean, we are
That
for,
Holocaust happened to everybody.
yeah, I know, but it
wasn't
was,
just the Jews that got whacked.
oh, I know, there was a lot of
Everybody got
Catholics
whacked.
and,
There's a book out, Bloodlands, between Minsk and Kiev, 14 million civilians got killed.
oh, yeah.
14 million. That's not in Germany. It's not
I know,
in
Mao, Mayo, he killed 100 million of his people.
Well,
I mean, so, you look at the blood of, these different particular, so I'm just saying, is it okay? So I guess the point I'm making is they're singing a song because God wiped out all these
well, I guess
soldiers.
if God tells you to kill them, then that's okay, because He, the Lord gives and the Lord takes, right?
Yeah, and that's the point. I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts on that one?
Like, doesn't it kind of reinforce the idea that the Messiah was going to be a military victor? Like,
Yeah.
there seems to be a pretty consistent track through the Old Testament around, I guess, earthly victories, like battles and stuff. So,
Yeah, they thought he was going to come as a conquering hero. Yeah, so I mean, and I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't want to get into,
maybe the person who wrote these words was misunderstanding the message that God was giving in the first place, and that's why Jesus came.
Well,
Let me clear this up a little bit.
it's kind of interesting because in the Jewish tradition, I think it's in their Talmud, they said the angels actually were celebrating, at the same time when all the people had died. And God said, that, they weren't in any danger. So God actually did something to help his people who were in danger and who were under the slavery. And so God did something for them. And so, but that was part of their tradition, is that God reprimanded the angels. And I don't know if that's true or not. That's what came from their Talmud. But that's what they say. And it's part of their tradition. I mean, they believe it.
he took his time doing it over 400 years.
Yeah, well, he basically wiped out, there was nobody that came out of slavery that lived. They all died. God took them around until they all were dead. Once they were all dead, then their kids who had never been slaves were allowed to enter the promised land. But he killed them all. They were all gone. They were all dead, except for one, Joshua.
Joshua, yeah.
Yep. So everybody else was gone. Moses didn't even go in, but everybody who was a slave was gone. And so none of them were, And so I think we mentioned last time, you can get the slaves out of Egypt, but you can't get Egypt out of the slaves. I mean, that's really, and the slavery to, even, when you look at, we learned about Lot's wife. She had a longing, and that's what it meant, a longing for that particular town. And so she looked back, and I think there's that, people, that are, when they have an attachment to sin, sometimes it's right to the grave. I mean, people you see that with a lot of drug addicts and alcoholics, and it's a lot of them don't, I don't know too many that have been drinking for a long, long time that actually it doesn't kill them. They don't go to the grave, in that state. There are some. Actually, I know one person that it's been 11 years, Carl. He's part of this. Pray for him too. He's not doing that good, but he drank for, he was in the Army for 20 years and basically an alcoholic for almost 40, but once he quit, he's been 12 years now. He hasn't drank anything. So
Carl is sick. He's sick.
yeah, I mean, he is. Something with his pancreas. It's been, and which is probably from drinking all those years. But I mean, most of the people that I know of that become alcoholics are, they just don't get free. They basically go to their death from that.
Down on the bottom, it says a little bit about the song, the Song of the Sea, I guess is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, victory chant. That's good, and we can definitely read that. The Song of the Sea, a victory chant commemorating Israel's deliverance and Egypt's destruction. Even more, it is a hymn of praise to Yahweh, who is hailed as Savior, Warrior, Redeemer, and King. The song adopts a dual perspective. The first part looks back at the Exodus event, and the second part looks forward to Israel's future occupation of Canaan. A similar dual perspective shapes the Song of Moses. So the one thing we have to understand, too, is these two songs, they rhyme in ideas. They don't rhyme, so we have verses that rhyme, we'll say, like rain, Spain, train, we'll rhyme the last word or something, but these actually have rhyming in ideas, so they're similar ideas. And so I'm going to continue on so I get a little further. So Pharaoh's chariots and his host he cast into the sea, and his picked officers are sunk in the Red Sea. The floods cover them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow your adversaries. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood up in a heap. So does the Lord have nostrils?
Sure, technically, since Jesus was fully man.
Well,
It's
that's,
visual.
yeah. There is, they have this visual. And so you can see that they're trying to relay concepts with things that people can, respond to. The deeps congealed in the hearts of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank as lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Does that mean there's more than one God? There's a lot of false gods.
But a lot of them believe, and they believe in.
They believed in a lot of different gods, but there is none like. Who is like you, majestic in holiness, terrible in your glorious deeds, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them up. You have led in your merciful love the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode. The peoples have heard, they tremble. Pangs have seized on the inhabitants of Philistia. Now are the chiefs of Edom dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling, seizes them. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them because of the greatness of your arm. They are still as a stone, till your people, O Lord, pass by, till the people pass by whom you have purchased. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. For when the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them. But the sons of Israel walked on dry ground in the midst of the sea. Then Miriam, and we remember Miriam is Moses and Aaron's sister, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, well, that's also the sister of Moses, but took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and dancing. So they just had a spontaneous, dance and praising of God, right? And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea." Then Moses led Israel onward from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. So that must have been one heck of a tree to sweeten the water that 2.5 million people could drink.
Maple syrup.
Yeah.
Yeah, maple tree.
Yeah, there was. But you see, they had just seen this great miracle. They had, 3 days later, they're grumbling. They're thirsty. I'm glad we're not like them. When we get a little bit of 3 days without drinking water, we grumble. And then the Lord made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tested them, saying, "If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give heed to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases upon you which I put upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. So this would have been like a pit stop, because 70 trees isn't a lot for 2.5 million people. It's not, this would have been, they would have had some provisions, they had some,
Oasis.
yeah, like a little oasis, but they could have stopped by there, but it wouldn't have been very much for them.
Is that number supposed to be taken literally, though, or is that just because 12 and 70 are both really important numbers in the Jewish religion?
Well, 12 springs of water. Yeah, that's another good point. It could have been just symbolizing those particular ones. I'm taking it, though, that maybe it was. It wasn't somewhere they could just stay, because, and I think that's the point is that if it was a nice if it was like a land of milk and honey where they could camp down and live, they would have stayed there, but they basically were able to get some relief. And then from here, we're going to find out where God, for the next 40 years, is going to feed them by providing the manna, the bread from heaven, which prefigures the Eucharist, right? And then also the quail, so he's going to give them some meat, that, and I think, when we look at it, there is a tree that you could put in the water that might not make it so brackish, but this tree isn't going to purify the water that that kind of numbers of people could drink, and it wouldn't make any difference. And so God can use, something that, some one log you throw into the water and it has this tremendous effect. There's miracles after miracles.
Symbolic.
Right. And I think, you got to remember they're being led by the cloud and the fire, in front of them and behind them. So God's protecting them. And so with that, I think we'll stand and pray. Oh, do you have okay.